Minute. Yeah. A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the December session of Inspire Book Review Club. 80th session है और बहुत सारा ज्ञान ले रहे हैं, लेते रहेंगे. Well, in the November session, we touched two extremes of our emotional spectrum. One was I Am a Voice Without a Form, which is a book written by Swami Vivekananda. And the other one was Psychology of Money. So we talked of spirituality and we talked of money together. And now, in today's session, we are going to experience something similar. We are going to touch two extremes of the thinking spectrum again, emotional one and the rational intellectuality. So friends, the first book that we have for review today is You Will Not Have My Hate. Well, when I heard this name, I read it twice. In fact, it is an unusual title, and so is the book. So is the approach that this book is going to give you. So, the speaker, the reviewer is Mrs. Durya Akolawala. Durya is a very dear friend of mine, and I really am a big fan of her way of expression, her session always. So Durya is born and raised in Kolkata. She studied in Loreto College, Kolkata. She's an awesome teacher, and you will get to see her fan following very soon in the participants, definitely. She runs classes under Vocabulary. She also trains students in English, spoken English for competitive exams like TOEFL, GRE, etc. And she is a senior lecturer at ICAP. So very, very eager to hear from you about your book, the approach that it is going to give us. Over to you, Durya. I'll quickly unmute you, or you can unmute yourself. Durya, please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Okay, am I audible now?
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Hi all. First of all, thank you, Sheetal. Lot of warm words, totally overwhelmed. And yes, the book that I'm going to review today and get you all closer to the book is a book which I had actually never thought that I would, in fact, I had never heard about it for that matter. So definitely before I get into the book, I really need to let you all know of how I came by this book, which is quite important for me because I always feel that there's a short journey which leads to that particular book. And when Sheetal had called me for giving a book review, I am basically a fiction reader. I read a lot of fictions because I have my world of escapism where there is no reality, where there is no hurt and everything is a hey-go thing. And when she told me fiction, the first thing that came in my mind is I need to go buy a fiction book. Though I have plenty, but then when you have to do a review, you always want something very different. So with my bag, I ran off to Crossword, and ironically, there was a book launch that was going on that day, something called 17 Quotidian Ways of Life and something. Not that I was interested a lot in that. And to hide myself from being polite, to the people who were doing the book launch, because I really did not want to be a part of it, I went to the fiction section, took a tool, sat down, and in the very low row of that particular book section, I happened to see this book. A book, a title which I had never ever come across. It had also never been in any of the lists of must read, which we usually Google. But what caught my attention, which Sheetal said very rightly, was that the topic, the title of the poem, the book, You Will Not Have My Hate. And the hate part did kind of attract me to know further what is it all about and what is the author going to talk about when he says that you will not have my hate. So with this book and a couple of books, obviously I came back home, and again, it was not my first choice. I kept it aside. I had brought a biography on Bahadur Shah Zafar. I had got a book on Bengali. I had got a book on Punjab, Punjabis and Punjabiyat. And I did try to peruse through those books. But then somehow I felt that when it's a book review, you really need to review on a book which stays in the mind of people. This book, You Will Not Have My Hate, all right? I picked it up. I won't lie. One of the reasons, because it just has 110 pages. It has bold print. and a lot of space margin. So I knew that I'll finish it very quickly. And yes, I did finish it in 2 hours. But though it was 2 hours, I have a lot of takeaway from this book. I have learned a lot. And since I had to give a review, I read it almost 3 times. And there are certain portions that I'm going to share from the book, and I'll tell you all what are the important parts that have actually touched me. And definitely a suggestion from my side that you all should all read this book at least once. So the background of this book is basically laid at the time of 2015 when there were bomb blasts in Paris. The ISIL were very upset. That is an Islamic terrorism group, which was very upset about certain portions of Syria that was their homeland, which was attacked. So to retaliate, they did a series of bomb blasts, and they were suicide bombers in 3 different places on 13th November 2015. They did on 3 different places. One was the football stadium, where they did not get the entrance, the suicide bombers. So they blasted themselves outside. There were a lot of victims. Then there was a second bomb blast, not a bomb blast, but there was open firing at overcrowded cafes and restaurants. And the third place was where the author's wife was. That was the theater of Bataclan, where with her friend she had gone to see a particular concert. He was not fond of rock and roll and all, and his wife had gone. So the story begins, the first chapter, the name of the first chapter is A Night of Hell. So in the very beginning, we know what the scenario is. The author has very clearly told us what the scenario is. But what I like about this book is the way the author knows that he's walking on a tightrope. And yet, he knows how much of material he's supposed to present and how smartly he's supposed to present as he continues with the book till the end. He keeps our attention intact. Otherwise, we all know what the story is, because right at the very beginning, it's told that it is about an author who has lost his wife. So he's making his son sleep. He's just a 17-month-old child, and he's waiting for his wife to come home. And then suddenly he starts getting messages on his mobile saying, "How are you? Hope everything is okay. Is everything okay with you?" And then he's basically a journalist by profession. But when he wrote this book, he was a commentator in the radio broadcast. So obviously, the first thing that he did was, when he got a series of messages, he went and he switched on the television. And obviously, that particular moment changed his entire life, because that is when he got the news of the bomb blast. And he's used beautiful words. When a person suddenly realizes, your life is very convenient, your life is very easygoing, everything seems to be very nice. And then suddenly you have this jolt, a life-changing episode, which you cannot change back, which even if you want to behave like it's a dream, it's not a dream, it's a fact which you really have to fix. Sorry. So he's totally dumbstruck. He really doesn't know what to do. He cannot leave his child at home. At the same time, he just wants to steal a car. That's what he says. He wants to steal a car and go hunt for his wife. And he calls up his brother, his sister. They come running. And then he and his brother, they go about hunting for the wife. But they check all the lists. They check all the hospitals. They make sure they hunt every nook and corner for her. And obviously the fear, it darkens, it deepens. He knows that something is not right. Obviously, he knows, but he doesn't want to accept it. And then the second chapter, the chapters have been given beautiful names. They are just 2 or 3 pages, because I told you that the entire story is for 110 pages. But the chapters have been given excellent names, like Waiting, or you have The Night of Hell, then you have Stay Strong, or you have If It Had Been. So the titles of the chapters are very catching. You know what is coming in, but you really know how he's dealt with it. And then after 2 days, he gets to know from his wife's mother, who gets a call that yes, his wife is not anymore. So obviously hell breaks loose. There are certain lines which I had marked. There was this one particular line when he was seeing the news on the television, and the feeling he gets, because for the people in general all over the world, they are headlines. So when we see televisions, we are attracted to that particular news channel that makes it very interesting. They use words like massacre and slaughter and blood rage, but we do not realize the impact of these words that happens on the people who have lost their people in that particular kind of episode or event. So there's this particular line which I would really like to read for you all. Few lines which I really liked in the book. TV channels have begun to come up with the most lurid, grotesque headlines, the ones that will keep us watching, spectators to the world that is falling apart, massacre, bloodbath, carnage, slaughter. So that's what he's saying, that when news headlines are given, we really do not realize the impact of these words on the others or the people who are actually or have lost their people in that particular episode. Then he moves on and he says that the acceptance is slowly coming in, though he is not normal. And the day comes when he has to go to the morgue to see the body of his wife. So before that, he stops by a particular cafe to have a double espresso. And not that people around him know about what has happened in his life. So there are two people, general, sitting beside him at the bar, and they are discussing and they're saying this is not fair. And these lives have been lost unnecessarily, and something should be done. And then the author starts pondering that what is tragedy? And he's saying tragedy is not this gunshot. It is not this violence. It's not this bloodshed. He says tragedy for me is one word: absence. An absence that I'm supposed to live for an entire lifetime. So there are certain things which you pick and we can connect because we all empathize with people around. So we can definitely connect with the author. We go along with the flow of pain that he has. And another beautiful line that I really liked in this particular, if it had been, all right? And he says, waiting is a feeling without a name. And that really caught my eye because this is so true. Waiting is a feeling, but it doesn't have a name. And that is what he is doing. So on one hand, he is very happy with the fact that he's going to go and meet his wife at the morgue. On the other hand, he knows that probably it's the last time that he's going to see her, and he never expected her to see her, expected to see her in such a condition. And yeah, this is the line that I wanted to read. When he hears those two people discussing at the bar, so he thinks this, the author thinks this, and there's a beautiful message out here. Can't let those people die for nothing. Does anyone ever really die for anything? It could have been a reckless driver, a malignant tumor, or a nuclear bomb. The only thing that matters is that she is no longer here. Guns, bullets, violence. All of this is just background noise to the real tragedy now taking place, and that is, in colons, he writes absence. And then the next chapter shifts to the morgue where he goes to see his wife. And obviously, when he beautifully, he's used a lot of imagery and a lot of symbolism has been used by him to show the scene of the morgue, morgue when he goes to see his wife. And he sees police who's in a blue uniform. He sees the psychology department people in the yellow, and he avoids the psychology people because he's saying this grief is mine. And I don't want to share this grief with anybody. I don't want to reduce my grief. And he tries to avoid them, and he goes and sees his wife. And when he sees his wife, he remembers all the past happy moments with her. Definitely, that's the time when he's going to be really nostalgic. And when he sees his wife, there's a beautiful way he's described. He's saying the good memories with somebody is not the pictures that you put in the albums. Because you click, and okay, they are not the happy memories. But this is what he says. But the most beautiful moments of our lives are not those that stick in photographic albums. I remember all those moments when we just took the time to love each other, seeing an old couple and wanting to be like them. A burst of laughter on empty mornings, laughing in the comfort of our sheets. It is these insignificant moments where there is nothing to show, nothing to tell, that are the most beautiful. Those are the ones that fill my memory. Again, another beautiful message said by the author Antoine. I forgot to mention this. It has been written by the French author Antoine, and it has been translated into English by Sam Taylor. But the impact of the book is equally the same. Not that I've read it in French, but still. All right. And moving on, then the book goes a little slow because it is the time to prepare for the funeral. But at the same time, he's showing that how the child, his 17-month of child who knows nothing about it, is a balm to him because he's so occupied for doing things for the child that though the pain, the anguish, the grief is there within him, but the child's memories, the child's regular schedule that has to be followed, dropped in school, or the, what do we say, the creche and all, and making sure that he's bathed, making sure that he gets food, all that, he's so involved in it that though the pain is there, but the child is keeping him absolutely occupied till he simultaneously is working on the funeral for his wife. And there are certain important portions which he's spoken about, which one particular thing, and then the 2-3 chapters were something that I did flip through, not that I wanted to read it again, because they were showing about how people made it a point to make him feel very comfortable, and they were sympathizing with him, and they were giving him sending him tickets to travel to continents, and there were greeting cards, and there were letters, and people meeting on the road and showing their sympathy, showing their grief. And though it is a very serious book, but there is a very beautiful kind of a portion. It is called Stay Strong. The chapter is called Stay Strong, and it really caught my eye. And I realized that this is, being an English teacher, even I used to make this mistake, which we never realize what is in the mind of the others. So he says that when an incident happens in your life, people tend to uh, behave as if they are your closest friends, and they want to share all your grief, so that they feel that they have the first-hand information about what is happening in your life. So he puts it very nicely, and he says that when people ask you, how are you? They are not expecting a normal answer like, fine, everything is okay and all. But they are, with a kind of a look, with a lot of stress on how are you, with their eyebrows raised, like the entire feeling that they have for you, they understand your grief. So he says that most of the time I was very confused, but how should I reply to them? So he says there were times when I used to reply with, I am fine, what about you? But that would be very rude, because they would be taken aback that we are asking you this particular question for a particular reason. Then he says that then I decided that I will use the lines as expected of me. So when anybody asked him, how are you? He said, as expected to be. And he said that worked well. That pretty worked very nicely. It worked well because people would understand that, okay, this is how he's supposed to behave. And what struck me the most was, he said, when people give you condolence, or when people send you words, or when people meet you on the road and they really want to share your sorrow, he said, everything is okay. Things like, yeah, we are there with you. You can call us anytime. But the life sentence is the phrase when people say, stay strong. It's like they have shared the grief with you, they have tried to make things lighter for you, but in the end, when they put the phrase stay strong, it's like they're bringing the whole thing on you again, that something has happened and you've got to stay strong. So that is definitely one takeaway from me, that I'm never going to use these words stay strong again for anybody, because you are bringing it to the person again that something very terrible has happened, extremely terrible has happened in your life, and you're supposed to stay strong. So that was a very beautiful chapter. I read it all again. And I think I did write about it somewhere, with a paper I cannot find. Never mind. And after that, that was one portion that really caught my eye. And after that, again, it's a slow paced thing, the book, which is talking about the preparations for funeral, and the preparations for, he decides not to, what do we say anything in the funeral. He also decides not to take his son for the funeral, but he decides that he's going to give Melvin's letter. But he writes a letter on behalf of Melvin for his mother. So that I'll read later. But since the topic, the most important part of the book, you will not have my hate. Okay. This topic, or this title, has been given because he was a journalist, and he wrote an open letter after 3 days of his wife's death. He wrote an open letter on Facebook. okay, addressing the people, the terrorists who had killed his wife. And it was a beautiful letter where he said, I'll read it for you all, but before that, he said that I am not going to hate you all because you all want me to hate the people around. You want me to doubt the people around. You want me to feel that you've taken an extremely important part of my life, which I totally agree. But hatred is something that I am not going to bring. And he says that me and my son, we are going to live a complete life because we are assuming that my wife and his mother has not left us. And that is where he uses, you will not have my hate. That the game, the entire thing of hatred, which these incidents create, he's saying, I'm not going to give you the pleasure of hatred. So that is the most important, okay, the most important part of the whole thing. And it is a one page letter which I would really like to read because that is what the whole story is about. So this is an open letter that he had written on Facebook. I won't read the whole thing, just the important portions that will kind of catch your attention. And this is what he wrote addressing to the terrorists. On Friday night, you stole the life of an exceptional being, the love of my life, the mother of my son, but you will not have my hate. I don't know who you are and I don't want to know. You are dead souls. If that God for whom you blindly kill made us in his image, each bullet in my wife, you are dead souls. If that God for whom you blindly kill made us in his image, each bullet in my wife's body will have been a wound in his heart. So, no, I will not give you the satisfaction of hating you. That is what you want. But to respond to your hate with anger would be to yield to the same ignorance that made you what you are. You want me to be scared, to see my fellow citizens through suspicious eyes, to sacrifice my freedom for security. You have failed. I will not change. And then there is another important portion in this, which he says, of course, I am devastated by grief. I grant you that small victory, but it will be short lived. I know she will be with us every day, and that we will see each other in the paradise of free souls, to which you will never have access. There are only two of us, my son and myself, but we are stronger than all the armies of the world. Anyway, I don't have any more time to waste on you, as I must go to see Melville, the son's name is Melville, who is just waking up from his nap. He's only 17 months old. My son eats his snack as he does every day. Then we will play as we do every day, and all his life, this little boy will defy you by being happy and free because you will not have his hate either. A beautiful message passed to globally to everybody, which was actually read by almost 22 lakh people. In that span of time, 2 lakh people read it. And then after this, he continues and he talks about the funeral. And he doesn't mention, thankfully, it's not mentioned in a lot of detail because, anyways, the book was very heavy with emotions. And in the end, they show that he and his son, they go to meet Elena. It's spelled as Helene, but I checked the French thing. It's pronounced as Elena, and they go to meet her. And yes, he takes a photograph from his place of the three of them together, and he decides I'll leave it at the tomb, so it eases my pain to think that okay, she's there and she's resting in peace. So he takes his child, he goes to the tomb, he places the photograph, and the child gets off his lap, runs on his mother's tombstone, pulls up all the flowers, okay, messes up, kisses the tomb. He doesn't know, he's 17 months old. But he picks that photograph and he brings it back to his father. A sign that indicates that no, she's never going to leave us, she's always going to be with us. And the end part, the last part is they show that they both are coming back home, jumping on every puddle that the rain has created, indicating that he is going to live his life and he's going to make sure that his son lives a life without hate or anguish. He says that, yes, I have lost a very important part of my life, but I'll make sure that we do not hate. A beautiful book that I really liked. And I'll definitely mention the important takeaways before I take your leave from my small session that I had. First takeaway was, yeah, I mean, if you are people who love to read but you do not get time, or you all are non-readers and you really want to show that yes, you have read a book, this is the perfect book, because I told you it's just 110 pages. You can always read this book and say, yes, I just completed a book in 2 hours. Nice ways to kind of show off, kind of. Second thing is that this book, I'll make sure that I'll keep it somewhere where I can see the title. So when we have our ups and downs in life, and we don't go through the same pace of emotions every day, and there are times when we are very bitter and we are very upset. So probably when I will look at this particular title, I will kind of figure out that the sorrows and the small ups and downs that we have in life is nothing in comparison to the strength that the author has, even after such a big loss, when he says that I am not going to hate. And yes, of course, the third thing that I already told you is that I'm never going to use the phrase stay strong, because I realized after reading this book that stay strong, on the other hand, does not console the person who has lost a very close and near and dear one, but rather makes him realize again that that has been a terrible incident which he has to face for a lifetime. So that is my take on the book. And thank you, Sheetal, for giving me this opportunity to do the review.
Thank you, Durya. Thank you. In fact, I'm speechless. It was indeed a very, very emotional book, and you really dealt with it very sensitively. I truly appreciate the way you took those corners. मुझे कुछ जगहों पे लग रहा था कि शायद मैं आपकी जगह होती तो ये portion क्या मैं would I have included it in my review, but then that is all that makes you go through the emotion and feel it. So fantastic. Thank you so much. And yes, a lot of lessons for all of us. Indeed, we are not taught how to take death properly. We are still in a very different phase when we lose our near dear ones. So I think it's a learning lesson. So thank you, Durya. Thank you so much. Well, taking the session ahead, the next book in hand, as I said, that we are dealing with different spectrums of thinking this time. So it's artificial intelligence and the future of power. And the reviewer is Mr. Chandrahas Chaudhary. आज मैंने सर से कहा था कि I'm going to make a confession. So my confession is that I'm so fond of the kind of books sir chooses and reviews at Inspire that I happen to buy them every time. And
that's good.
Yes, and in fact, they change the way I look at things, and they really add a new value to my life. So, sir, thank you for doing that at a subconscious level.
No problem.
So he's master in industrial engineering. Then he did lectureship at Ramdev Baba College for some years, after which he worked as technical head for many IT organizations in India and abroad. Now he's running his own software consultancy firm. Well, what interests us most about him are his interest areas which he keeps exploring, that is Ayurveda, natural farming, and spirituality. But today's subject is far away from all of these. Yes, this is his core area. So we are waiting for learning a lot from you today. A lot of my students are also there. I had told them all that this is going to give you a sight into the future ahead. So thank you, sir, for choosing the book. Over to you.
Yeah, okay. So let me show you this book. Are you able to see me and hear? Okay, so this is the book. The size is really big, and I'll switch on to the PPT, the PowerPoint presentation, so that we can continue with it. So let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, it is visible.
Yeah, right. Okay. So the book that I am going to review today is Artificial Intelligence and the Future of Power. by Raju Malhotra, and he has basically calling it 5 battlegrounds for the artificial intelligence. So basically, we will see what those 5 battlegrounds are. Before that, just something about the author. Let me minimize this. Okay. So the Raju Malhotra is an internationally acclaimed author and public intellectual. He combines his background in physics and computer science. So he's basically a technical person. He's into computer science and physics from quite early days of like artificial intelligence or the computer science. With he has almost like quarter century of path-breaking research on India's historical and future place in the world. So he concentrates more on like India. As the founder of Princeton-based Infinity Foundation, he continues to change the global discourse with new and innovative paradigms. Raju Malhotra's work covers a broad spectrum, including like mind sciences, civilization, geopolitics, and the future of India. He also runs his YouTube channel. It's Raju Malhotra Official, and you can, see that he has a lot of videos on not only on the book but on many other topics. He interviews many other persons in these areas like mind sciences, civilization, geopolitics, and we can really get really good you can say information or the learning from his YouTube channel also. So maybe after this review, I'll just give you that YouTube channel name also on WhatsApp. So in this book, yeah, he has basically talked about 5 AI battlegrounds. Where exactly the artificial intelligence in future, where the war on AI will be fought. The one is basically economic development and jobs. What exactly will happen on this, basically on this front, like economic development and jobs. Another war will be like who will hold the power in the new world order, like which country or which maybe like if not country, then which organization maybe. Then psychological control of desires and agency. The metaphysics of the self and its ethics. He's also into spirituality. So he also, whenever he talks or whenever he writes something, generally some spirituality comes in his talk or writing. So he talked about many things about like ethics and something like that. And the last battleground he discussed about what is India's future, battle for India's future. So we'll talk about it, or we will see what exactly he thought about each one of it. So the first battleground is basically, in the first battleground, it is clear that AI and new technologies will destroy jobs, even though some economists keep assuring us that it will ultimately also create new jobs. You might have heard about this, like some are saying that because of the AI that there will be loss of jobs, but some are basically saying that okay, it will generate new jobs. But Malhotra is not so sanguine, or he's not very optimistic, and says AI and recombinant technologies will ensure that a significant portion of blue and white collar jobs in most industries will become obsolete, or at least transformed to such an extent that workers will need re-education to remain viable. It is very much, you might have felt now that because of the AI, many jobs are basically, many people have lost the jobs. But at the same time, there are many new jobs which are coming up. For example, if you look at the IT jobs for Indians, Indians are everywhere now because of this IT. But at the same time, just to give you a small example, few years back, there was a whole industry of medical transcription, but right now that whole industry has gone, right? AI or the smart bots have taken the place of those medical transcription people. So, that is how it is going to play. And at this point, we really don't know how exactly it will move forward and how it will happen. So while AI will destroy old jobs and create new ones, the most lucrative new ones will be concentrated in communities with high levels of education and availability of capital. So more broadly, AI will worsen the divide between the rich and poor, the haves and the have-nots, and that we are already, feeling that. For example, the the gap between rich and poor is basically increasing. I mean, if you look at the top 10% or top 5%, they are holding maybe like almost like more than 70 or 75% of the complete wealth of the world. You might have heard in this pandemic that Jeff Bezos, or for that matter, Microsoft, Bill Gates, I mean, their wealth is increasing, but at the same time, there are a lot of people who have lost the job. They are basically not getting the salaries, and there are so many. I mean, if you look at the bottom strata of the society, like the workers, they lost the job, and they are basically I mean, trying to find out like how they can earn the money to feed their children, right? So that is how, I mean, that gap will be very much widened because of this AI. That is what Malhotra feels. What I did, I mean, while reading this book, I have also, I mean, checked what is happening around and in the world. So I have included that also here. I have included some of the research paper, or the what is there in the newspaper, or in the industry, something like that. So you can see this. I mean, this is first one is March 17, 2021. They says empathetic robots are killing off the world's call center industry. So there was a very big call center industry, and these empathetic robots, I mean, robots who can empathize with the customers, they are basically killing that whole industry. US lost over 60 million jobs. Now robots take, and artificial intelligence will take millions more. So that is, I mean, really happening, what he has written in the book, that the jobs will be lost, and who knows like how many new will be created. And if the new jobs are created, still what the old people will do, or the mid-level people will do, those who cannot, I mean, they are young enough, but they cannot, I mean, go to the school again and learn the newer things. So that would be a real problem. Then the second background relates to global power. Actually, AI is taking, I mean, the countries, or you can say the political parties like China's Communist Party, or countries like US. They are really taking help of this AI to achieve their global power. So the primary battle in AI is between US and China right now. The former with the help of tech giants like Google and Facebook, and latter with the state control companies and surveillance technology. I mean, China has developed a very good surveillance technology using AI. So basically, they are taking the help of that. The battle for supremacy will transcend actual political system, for both democracy and autocracy now have powerful algorithm and tools to manipulate human minds. We will see that how they are manipulating. This battle will peak over the next decade as AI grows better and smarter. Malhotra speculates that some private companies controlling this technology could become more powerful than many countries, just as the East India Company did in India. India could become a tech colony of the Google and Facebook of the world. So we may become a tech colony. Something similar to what East India Company did to us. We were a colony of Britishers then, right? And this is something from the newspapers or the news articles. Brookings says whoever leads in artificial intelligence in 2030 will rule the world until 2100. So basically, this artificial intelligence is a very key factor now for ruling the world. If you look at the United Nations 2019 report, which says China, the United States, and Japan together account for 78% of all AI patent filings in the world. USA and China account for 75% of all patents related to blockchain technologies, 50% of the global spending on Internet of Things, at least 75% of the cloud computing market, and 90% of the market capitalization value of the world's 70 largest digital platform companies. So basically, this blockchain technology or cloud computing or Internet of Things are basically associated technologies for AI. I mean, it goes with the AI. And you can see here like China, United States, maybe like Japan, they are basically leading right now. And definitely the person or the you can say political organization or the country who is having a better hand on this AI, they will rule the world. and we are nowhere, I mean, in this race right now. The third battleground is basically a psychological control and loss of the individual power of agency. Most people think that a machine's ability to control or influence human behavior is science fiction, not reality. I mean, that is what most people feel right now, but that is not true. But says Malhotra, the truth is, in some ways, machines know individual even better than they know themselves, because people know only their conscious selves and cannot access their unconscious selves. So this is really a very important statement that he's making. Machines know individual even better than they know themselves. I mean, because the person has a limited mind. And if you look at the machine or the AI, it's an infinite memory. I mean, they can store the data from last 400 years or 1,000 years or whatever. I mean, whatever data you generate, your habits, what you purchase, what you eat, what you talk, what you chat, everything will be stored in the AI or in the cloud, and it can be analyzed to find out or to profile yourself, right? So that is how, I mean, he's saying that machines know individuals even better than they know themselves. This is because machines can access and store long-term knowledge about ourselves and machinery, and machine memory far exceeds human memory. Machines can tease out what we are subconsciously thinking about without knowing it, since it is embedded in the choices we make and which machines store for reference. One machine knows our choices, our data can be stored and used. Once machines know our choices, our data can be stored and used against us to tell us what we want, what we should buy, or what we should do. As machines get smarter and more powerful, human needs to use less of their own judgment, or a process that Malhotra calls moronization. We will see a bit more about this moronization, what exactly he means. Now, in this third battleground, if you look at what is happening around, I picked up this one particular story. The person that you are looking at here is a former Facebook data scientist, Frances Haugen. She was basically a employee of Facebook, and she found out there are many issues with the Facebook. And one of the issues that she brought in the public is this. Research shows Facebook coveted young user despite health concerns. If you see this, Haugen has leaked one Facebook study that found that 13.5% of UK teen girls in one survey say their suicidal thoughts became more frequent after starting on Instagram. Or another leaked study found 17% teen girls say their eating disorders got worse after using Instagram. Or about 32% of the teen girls said that when they felt bad about their bodies, Instagram made them feel worse. Facebook researchers found, which was first reported by the journal. And the bad thing is Facebook has never came up with these findings in a public. I mean, they suppressed that. And that is how this Haugen, after leaving the Facebook, I mean, she brought it. She is basically a whistleblower, and she brought all these issues out in the public. And now there are a lot of discussions and a lot of things going on related with this. Now, the fourth battleground is basically a metaphysics, the blurring distinction between intelligence and consciousness. As Malhotra puts it, AI's success in training machines to generate intelligent responses has led to a worldview where life, mind, and consciousness are merely a biological process running on human beings as machines. This is biological materialism. That is what he is saying, where the human mind is nothing more than a mix of chemicals and other elements being recombined to produce everything from thought to action. So he's basically talking about something like biological materialism, something like, economic materialism. We dealt in the current, world. So he said there will be something like a biological materialism, which amounts to digital dehumanization, which seems beneficial for we can now, with the help of algorithm and intakes of specific products, stimulate the pleasure we all crave. We can now get all that we desire through artificial means of stimulation, including brain altering chemicals, augmented virtual reality, at some point one will not be able to distinguish between a real human experience of pleasure or pain from something an algorithm can generate artificially. I mean, that is what, I mean, you can see that, like, instead of going to some tourist space, you can really use, now there are companies who are basically using augmented and virtual reality, which will give the experience of like you are actually gone there, like you are climbing say some mountain, or you are surfing on a sea, or you are basically going into deep inside the sea. I mean, that is what those companies are basically generating. So this dehumanization, what exactly this is? So digital dehumanization is about not seeing the person behind the mask of the internet. I mean, we have realized this. I mean, if you look at the current social media, you can say social media, then you will find that persons are left and right. I mean, criticizing somebody, they are using very foul language and everything, right? That is basically because of the dehumanization the process that is happening. Because in that dehumanization process, what will happen is there is no non-verbal communication is absent. I mean, when you talk face to face, there is a non-verbal communication. Like we can see the how the person is standing, or his how he's behaving. I mean, we get some non-verbal clues from the person. So for example, if somebody is saying something bad to me, still looking at the non-verbal clues, probably I'll just ignore that. But that is not happening in the social media or social media chat or this Twitter and Facebook conversation. We don't give benefit of doubt in this social media or these chats. Then herd mentality, like if one person is saying something, automatically somebody start. I mean, there is something known as a herd mentality, which came into play when we are using social media platforms. So just because we don't see a person on the other side of a tweet or forum message, it doesn't mean there isn't one. Behind the word, there is a human being with aspiration, fear, desires, and opinions. Forgetting that or pretending that you do is to dehumanize them. And this process of dehumanization is a precursor of abusive behavior. Ultimately, what we see on the social media is basically the part of this dehumanization. And the last battleground that he talked about is, of course, India, where global tech is seeking to control our future by offering freebies and ensuring that we don't develop our own tech capabilities. We give away our data to Google and Facebook and Amazon, and our personal data rests in servers that only big tech or foreign government can access. I mean, we are facing this day in, day out now. We are using free Google, we are using free Facebook, we are using free WhatsApp, right? But ultimately, what we are basically giving away is our personal data, like what exactly I like, what I purchase, what I think, what I chat. I mean, there are so many things that they are basically getting, and they are basically analyzing that. So Malhotra believes that if India does not act fast to upgrade its AI and tech knowledge, it is going to be reduced to a tech colony. We don't have much time to lose. Every policymaker in India should read Raju Malhotra's book to understand what we are up against and what we need to do to overcome our tech deficits, or else we will become the waste cyber coolies. I mean, right now we see that whatever, I mean, persons they are going in IT industry, we call them cyber coolies only, because they are going there and just I mean coding, right? They are not at the managerial level, or they are not at the decision making level. So they are basically cyber coolies right now. So using our cheap software manpower to make the West even more powerful. So we are making them more powerful by providing them the software manpower, and that is how he feels that every person who is making a policies in India should read this book and understand what is happening in this AI field. So if you, I just try to find out what is happening on this, like what government thinks, and there are few things which probably the government is taking care of, like as fresh whistleblower leaks points to Facebook, Laxity India, government promises action. So they are trying to take some action there. FB, Twitter, Google asked to set up India servers so that the data will not go overseas, but our data will remain in our hands or in our country. or they are basically the government is promoting these local apps which are like Chingari or Koo or ShareChat or Josh, something similar to the social media platform like Twitter or YouTube or something like that. Not to that level, but at least there is something they have started with. He talked about modernizing and colonizing. So I thought we will, talk something about that. So what he says, right now, if you want any information, we don't try to recollect it from our memory. We directly go to the Google. He call it as Google Devta. So we directly go to the Google and type in the search and find out the information, right? So he feels that because of that frequent searches, there is a process happens which is known as memory atrophy. As the memory atrophy happens, you get a short attention span. And when you get a short attention span, your ability to study declines. So there is a declining of studying habits. And because of this social media platform or social, your ego get inflated because you put something into the social media, then you start getting likes, you get 100 likes, 1,000 likes, and you start, your ego start getting inflated in that, right? And he calls them as newly minted pseudo intellectual. They are not the real intellectuals, but they are pseudo intellectuals. And because of these social media dependencies and addiction, we are basically turning into morons, or that is the process he defined as moronization. And colonizing, if you go to the history, what happened, why we were the British colony, why Britishers have ruled us so many years, because that East India came in. They started moronizing our people, basically. They started imposing or putting in their you can say industries, their pathy. For example, if I try to give you one small example, they brought in the modern medicines which is totally useless, and they tried to stop the Ayurveda or our traditional medicinal system. If you look at it today, also there is a law which prevents using our local remedies. They call it Bhondu, Babas, and something like that. But in the garb of that, they are also stopped using like Ayurveda or such a fantastic, good system wherein everybody can treat their root causes. Allopathy treats basically the symptoms, but Ayurveda treats the root causes. So they started moronizing the people. They have attacked on our education system, our Gurukul kind of education system, where we learned ethics and everything, right? So in a similar fashion, right now, these tech companies or these big companies, they are starting colonizing it. Not only big companies, but governments or for example, the Communist Party of China. What they are basically doing, they are spreading their wings into other countries. They have captured like Pakistan. They have captured a lot many African countries. They have hand in that. And when they push this AI kind of technology there, they get a lot of data from there, and then they can control not only people, but they can control their political system. They can control their whole thing. That is what Mr. Rajiv Malhotra talked about in his book, that basically it is moronizing, and this colonizing, it is happening once again, something which happened earlier. If you look at the AI surveillance technology origin, you will find that US, China, these are the two main companies who have basically captured the whole world. You see everywhere there is either US technology or Chinese technology. Now, if this technology, for example, AI surveillance, I'll tell you the small example. Say if you are using MI camera, if you are putting in MI camera in your house, what happens, all the pictures or everything, all the videos, it goes into their server, the server of that company, which is basically Chinese company. and then you get an app wherein you can see, okay, who is coming in my house and all that. You feel really good. Okay, yeah, I mean, I can see my house anywhere. I can see the triggers, like somebody came in or something has happened or something like that. But at the same time, that whole data is basically going to their server. And there are technologies like big data which can analyze that information, and they can find out anything from that data. I mean, so this is what basically they are doing. So just to summarize the whole thing, artificial intelligence is only partially visible. I mean, even right now in your hand there is artificial intelligence. I mean, if you pick up your phone and you uh, you put your finger on that finger reader, artificial intelligence starts from there. You ask Google something, artificial intelligence is there. So artificial intelligence is everywhere, and it is partially visible, and you see only small part of it. But what is happening beneath that, you really don't know. I mean, what exactly happening when your data gets stored into their server? I mean, the algorithms are written by them, like Google or Microsoft or Facebook, and they can do anything. I mean, we have seen that in this pandemic, if you write or if you create any video which says that vaccines are bad, your video will be deleted automatically by Facebook or by Google or wherever you put it. So basically what is happening, the control of that, I mean, even if my video is really good, it is really speaking some truth about it, still it will not be shown to the people. It will not be there on the YouTube or Google. So that is what is happening, I mean, right now also. So the positive side is that technology is making machines smarter. I mean, there are definitely some positive sides to it. However, the deeper view explained in this book shows that AI is also making a growing number of people cognitively and psychologically dependent on digital networks. Whether you are a social media fanatic, a diehard AI affectionate, or a paranoid skeptic, it is impossible to escape the ubiquitous impact of AI. Artificial intelligence is the brain bringing together quantum computing, nanotechnology, medical technology, brain-machine interface, robotics, aerospace, 5G, Internet of Things, and more. So basically, this AI is basically putting together all these technologies. So it is amplifying human ingenuity and disrupting the foundations of healthcare, military, entertainment, education, marketing, and manufacturing. And we are basically seeing that. I mean, if you look at the tourism industry. Earlier, there used to be small shops of this tourism. I mean, the persons where we can go and I mean, plan our tour, right? But right now, they are almost closed. I mean, you can plan your tour, you can book your tickets, you can do anything on internet. Similarly, in education also, like if you think that we can go with the online education, say for example, and we are going, I mean, in the last 2 years we are basically, our children are basically doing online education. Now if you see that one person can teach millions of children, right? So ultimately the schools and everything are obsolete. I mean, one person, there will be a video of one person, and that can be consumed by millions of students. So ultimately there will be complete disruption with this education industry. Entertainment, we are also seeing that there are few companies now which are providing basically the entertainment, and small shops like CD giving shops and all those, they are basically they are all I mean, stopped. I mean, they are out of market right now. Similarly, in marketing, manufacturing, there will be a lot of disruption because of this AI technology. So artificial intelligence and the future of power argues that this AI-driven revolution will have an unequal impact on different segments of humanity. There will be new winners and losers, new haves and have-nots, resulting in an unprecedented concentration of wealth and power. So basically, these companies like Google, Facebook, Microsoft, they will have very unprecedented concentration of power because of this AI. And we don't know what they will do. I mean, if the power is within few hands, then it is really difficult to say like what exactly they will think and they will do. After analyzing society's vulnerabilities to the impending tsunami, the book raises troubling question that provoke immediate debate. Is the world headed towards digital colonization by USA and China? will depopulation become eventually unavoidable? I mean, if you know about the Bill Gates, he talked about depopulation. I mean, he talked about it 5 years back, and now that is happening. I mean, artificial intelligence and the future of power is a wake-up call to action, compelling public intellectuals to be better informed and more engaged. It educates the social segment most at risk and wants them to demand a seat at the table where policies on artificial intelligence are being formulated. So it is really important for the policymakers to, I mean, delve on this topic or understand about this topic and make the policies accordingly. Right now, I mean, the governments are basically taking steps on that. Like they are trying to control these companies. They are trying to impose some restriction on these companies and all that. But I don't think those are really, I mean, sufficient or not. I mean, so that was, I mean, in short, what exactly that book was. I'll just stop my screen and then I'll once again start. Right. So is that stopped right now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, right. So basically, I mean, in his book, I mean, I'll just show you that book once again. I mean, this is quite a big book. I have understood maybe like 10-15% part of it. I mean, he's a very intellectual guy, and he deals in spirituality also, like metaphysics and so many, I mean, complicated terms. So I think I'll require another 3-4 readings in order to understand it, what exactly is, I mean, he wanted to convey. But at the same time, I mean, the broader thing is that everybody has to wake up to this, like what is this artificial intelligence, how it is going to affect, I mean, all the policymakers, even we as a parent. I mean, how our children will be after 10 years, what is going to happen, right? So that we should prepare them accordingly. Like, so that is my takeaway, I mean, of this book. Like, we should really, I mean, seriously look into this AI and think of everything, like our family, our country, and everything. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir. In fact, we should not wait for the policymakers to take action, and we should take action at our own micro level. Was
Right.
indeed a very strong takeaway. Thank you for taking us through the book so much in detail. I'm very sure बहुत ज़्यादा detail में है वो book. I was making notes and my pages just fell short of the space. बहुत सारा कुछ सीखा आज. Especially the Moronization, colonization is indeed an eye-opener. What is happening at the global level is truly alarming. So now the floor is open for question answers. I'm sure we have questions. We have people who have come with specific intentions to ask, I mean, to both the speakers. So floor is open for question answers.
Yeah, I wanted to speak, Sheetal.
Yes, Avanti.
Yeah, I had a question for Chandra, sir. Like, it is like I was like totally shattered when I listened to this. What I wanted to ask was, like you said, Sheetal, what should be our role? What should we do? We cannot escape this, no? So, what can we do?
Yes, I mean, you correctly said we cannot escape. There is no return. I mean, AI will be there and it will be there forever. I mean, till humanity exists. I mean, and what we can do is basically, I mean, there are multiple ways. I mean, we can look at it. I mean, number one, we should first understand it, right? I mean, by reading this book, or there are a lot of other material which is available. What are these different things, like what is surveillance? I mean, something like when you go and purchase your, say, food, for example, right? So you think about it, right? You read the ingredients, right? Whether they are suitable for me or not, if there are chemicals in that, and so many things, right? We really care about that. Similarly, you have to understand this AI, artificial intelligence. What are the different aspects of it? Like when somebody says Internet of Things, what exactly it is, right? everybody has to know about this. Otherwise, what will happen? I mean, there will be devices, Internet of Things devices in your home, and if you do not fully understand it, probably there will be problems, right? Another level, basically you have to educate your children also, like how to use this technology, what are the good effects and what are the bad effects about it, right? The another level could be like you have to see, I mean, your policymakers, like or in another way, that we have to elect those people who really understand these newer things, and they really understand about what will be the effect of this on the whole country, because it is really important. I mean, if our policymakers do not understand it, maybe after 5 years we will be like colony of US or China, something like that. I mean, not in a real sense, something like East India Company did, but in a different way. I mean, they will control everything. They will know everything about us. They will know like how to. For example, I mean, the recent example is basically the Trump election, right? It has been speculated widely that Russians have used that technology, and that Cambridge, that Analytica, some company, to basically rig their elections, right? So it is that at that higher level, I mean, and it will affect our own lives also. So it is really important to understand that technology, find out what are the effects on us, or on our children, on our society, on our country, and then take appropriate actions. Sheetal, your thoughts?
Avanti, did you get your answer, or
I mean,
Yeah,
there is.
what I got is this has to be taken seriously, and I hardly know anything about it. I have to begin with this book, I think.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
ट्रू? आई थिंक कॉन्शियसली अगर हम चीजों को देखना भी शुरू करते हैं, फॉर एग्जाम्पल बहुत कॉमनली पीपल से लैंडेड एट सो एंड सो एयरपोर्ट, बोर्डेड इन फ्लाइट, व्हाट आर वी डूइंग? वी आर इन्फॉर्मिंग द बर्गलर्स की भाई हमारा घर खाली है. सो वहां से शुरुआत करते हैं अगर हम, तो बहुत सारी ऐसी चीजें हैं. अब व्हेन वी सी के एक कोई चीज को शॉप करने जाते हैं, वी सर्च फॉर इट, तो अगले 6 महीने तक उसी के सजेशंस आ रहे हैं, which really you cannot help, but at least consciously हम उसे avoid कर सकते हैं. I think मुझे जो समझ में आया, आपका सर is a better judge, but मुझे जो चीजें broadly समझ में आई कि we are being judged, we are being tracked everywhere. So keeping our conscious in place, I think will work.
Right. That's
नहीं,
true.
मुझे तो ऐसे लगा मतलब कि अगर ये अवॉइड करना है तो जाके हिमालय में जाके मेडिटेशन करना पड़ेगा, फोन छोड़ देना पड़ेगा, कंप्यूटर कुछ नहीं, और क्या कर सकते हैं उसके अलावा तो
No, we cannot escape. I mean, that is not a choice, because even if you go to Himalaya, your children will not go, right? So you have to be here, right? We have to educate them. We have to, I mean, consciously look around. I mean.
Yeah, I'll share a small thing here. A few days back, I was with a friend's family, and her 8th standard child had a phone, and I simply asked, "Is he having a phone?" She said, "Yes, this is the reason, that is the reason, online classes वगैरह." I said, "All that is sorted now. We have offline school, so why phone now?" And they went back, they discussed, and the child surrendered the phone. I think कहीं ना कहीं हमें as parents actions लेने होंगे कि हम बहुत माइक्रो लेवल पे शायद बात करें, लेकिन that is what will help us.
Exactly. And we have to responsibly use the social media platform.
Yes.
I mean, never click on a link if you are in a doubt. I mean, so many scams happening. Click on this link and get this much free. Click on that link, get that much free. I mean, we have to really educate ourselves and act very responsibly.
Yes, but I really appreciate the way author has dealt with those battlegrounds so distinctly. Yes. I mean, understanding it at global level, at micro level, at all the fronts, and then specifically addressing India and the problem we have. नई चीजें जब होती है तो हम बहुत ज्यादा उत्सुक होते हैं उनको लेने के लिए. So exactly. How consciously we take it.
Exactly. Right.
Fantastic. Do we have more questions for our reviewers? All right. So on that note, thank you so much, Durya. Thank you so much, Chandra sir. Indeed, you both took us through extremely different genres, but deep dive into the topic, and we were thoroughly thrilled emotionally as well as at intellectual challenges level. So thank you very much for your efforts, for your inputs. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Sheetal.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Sheetal.
you. Thank you. That is all for the day. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Bye. Good night.